Good evening.
Good evening.
How's everybody?
Hot.
Just peachy? Hot?
Doing good.
Doing good.
Good. It is warm. It is warm. I tell you, I can't find any place to escape it. It's hot everywhere. You go to the higher elevation, the air's thin. It feels worse to me up there than it does down in the flatland. Not good. Well, welcome back. Hope everybody had a good vacation last week on the 4th. Spent some time with your family. So let's catch up where we are. So let me share my screen and we'll get started. Thank you for joining me tonight. All right. Okay. Thank you, Becca, for that. Prayers for her mom. I tell you, that's tough sledding. Let's see where we are here. All right, we're at week 8 of 11. So that means we've got 4 more classes counting tonight. So tonight, we're looking at school discipline, conduct, and facilities. We've already talked about facilities, but we'll just touch on that again. Your discussion board activity was to interview an assistant principal about discipline, observe due process, and what surprised you. Here's some thoughts that for our stars of the week for that. Rebecca talked about lack of supervision. And leading to a lot of discipline incidents. And that was a concern of our AP, that teachers didn't know how to supervise or didn't supervise. They might be there, but they'd be on their phone. Lack of supervision does lead to a lot of problems. And it leads to a lot of referrals, the more discipline you have to do. Jessica talked about a safe harbor provision. I don't know that she called it that, but that's what it is, where a kid brings something they're not supposed to, they can turn it in. You need to have that in your code of conduct. I pulled up the one from CMS and it's in there somewhere, but we'll look for that later. But that's a good thing to have. So if a kid brings something inappropriate, they can turn it in without punishment so that it doesn't get around school. David talked about need to have professional development for young teachers. We talked about that. And then also, here's a thought as well. And I know David talked about this, but I'll expand on that. I get asked all the time. I was in school today. I was at Cliffside today, elementary school. There's nobody there but staff, but I was in school today. But one of the things I get asked all the time is why do people suspend kids? Because interventions take time and personnel. It's easier just to send the kid home. That's why we go to it too much. But that's one of the things that if we would work with our teachers on supervising better, getting more accurate referrals, looking for other intervention strategies, we could cut suspensions down and we could do a lot better job with the school to prison pipeline. Leanne pointed out that discipline is much more difficult with EC 504. There's more steps in due process. I'm going to talk about that a little bit tonight as well. You got to do a manifestation termination, and we need to talk about, changing placement and those kinds of things, but she's exactly right. Mandy, that was in 6, let's see. Terrence talked about responsible person. Leslie did an excellent reflection. Chiquita said you need to make sure you make sure a kid's got an IEP or BEP, behavior intervention plan, or I guess that'd be a BIP, or a professional education plan or personal education plan if they're gifted. One of the issues is, and we're going to talk about this when we do our final case study, is nowadays that we have intervention, we don't always know who's EC. because we don't pull them out anymore. So you better check. If you don't know, you better check. And Lakeitha pointed out, it's not a bad practice when you're disciplining a kid to talk to other administrators and counselors about what they've done with that kid. It should be in power school, but you should talk with them, and you avoid sometimes punishing kids that have one of these plans, and then we get in trouble legally down the road with one of these federal programs. So that's it. Olivia talked about, and Mandy talked about in case study, in discussion board activity 6. Mandy did a good job talking about all types of negligence, and Olivia talked about what to do about students posting to social media when there's an accident. And so those were good points. You need to have a policy on that. Those were good ones. But back to the content at hand, school discipline. Train your teachers. Make sure they know how to write referrals to start due process. Make sure you observe all the steps of due process. A, know what is substantive due process. What am I supposed to do? And B, that you follow it. Understand there are extra steps if the kid is in a federal protected class, has a behavior intervention plan, that's EC, has an IEP, that's EC, has a behavior plan, or has a education plan, which is 504, or is gifted. Any of those federal programs, there's extra steps to discipline those kids. Understand what they are, the substance, and make sure you follow that procedure. It's a good idea to talk with other administrators and counselors. If you don't know, because you're using a push in rather than pull out model, and that's, instead of using mainstreaming, you're using other models for exceptional children, inclusion model. And we have different terms for them, but in effect, there's two ways to deliver exceptional children's services: a push in or a pull out. Either you push teachers in the room, you call that inclusion or whatever, different people call it different things, or you pull the kids out. I commonly refer to that as mainstreaming, where they're in some classes, but they pull out for others. If you don't do a pull out, a lot of times you don't know which kids are identified and have a federal program of some sort, or in a federal program and have one of these federal plans. The rules are different from them. There's more steps. So make sure you know that. What are those extra steps? All right, where's my expert? There she is, Melissa. Aren't you an expert? You got no more than me.
I don't think I'm an expert, but I've been around a lot.
Yep. Well, that's all that matters. That makes you an expert. Location. The definition of an expert is somebody that lives more than 30 miles away. So that'd be you.
For sure.
All right. So now we're going to discipline an EC child. Now, some of you others are experts too. You get in here. All right. We've talked about this before, the button seat rule. What does that mean? Well, that's changing placement. If the kid's not in his regular seat, you've changed his placement. You got up to 10 days. After that, you must go through the process, except if he's showing a pattern, especially if it's aggressive behavior or violent behavior. Now, third time on that one. All right, so we're going to do a manifestation determination, determine if this child's behavior is a function of their disability. All right, so we would start with a functional behavior assessment. Melissa, what is that?
From my experience and my knowledge, of functional behavior assessment is when we're looking at and getting evidence from those people who work with the child on a day-to-day, and like what behaviors are normal versus what behaviors are outlandish. I know in my school, we have a young man who screams, yells, and will just run off. Those are his norms.
Yeah.
That's how he behaves. That's not him acting out. Those are just things he does. So, we have things in place so that we can distract him. He has a bicycle that sometimes he can go ride in the hallways because, that's part of his plan. So you have to understand like what are actual aggressive behaviors and what are just his norm of behaviors.
Yeah. And that's part of that showing a pattern deal. If it's aggressive behaviors the third time, doesn't matter if you've only suspended him twice. The third time, if they're showing aggressive behaviors, you better go to the manifestation determination, because somebody gets sued, somebody gets hurt, and it comes to light that this was the third or fourth or fifth time that they've done this. You'll get hit with a negligence lawsuit in a heartbeat. So that's a functional behavior assessment. Now, how does that work? Chronology or process with a behavior intervention plan.
Well, I think, and again, a lot of my experience comes from being on like a testing or a parent end. But the way I understand it is once we have like this like baseline measure, these are norm behaviors, right?
Once we've done
we
the
have to start
functional
looking at the
behavior
things
assessment
that are triggering other behaviors that are not normal, and then how do we put those things in place? Again, with that same young man, he has injured people. Sometimes for him it's unintentional, but he has injured people. So he literally, the district solution from last year into this year was he has 5 people that are his, and they come in shifts. So there's always like at least 3 people from the district and our school that are with him at all times. So, we have to look at, when he does display these aggressive behaviors and we're seeing more and more of them within the short period of time, we know that that's the point in time where we call parents. We're like, okay, he's got to go home today. That's how I understand it.
Yeah, you're right. All right. So a kid does an aggressive action. He gets sent to the office and you're the AP processing the discipline. If there is not a behavior intervention plan in place, that's the second thing. You have to go back and start the first for an EC kid. And then people get angry because you didn't punch that kid. He's showing aggressive behaviors. We haven't done the anecdotals. We haven't done the functional behavior assessment. If we'd already done that and had a behavior intervention plan, then we could proceed. But here's the problem. You get kids with disabilities. Let's say a kid's learning disabled. That has nothing to do with his behavior. So he doesn't have a behavior intervention plan. But he slaps some kid. You say, well, he's just learning disabled in reading. But he's got an IEP. You better start that functional behavior assessment. That's before we can even get to the manifestation determination. See, people think, well, we'll just put them in the manifestation right away. No, can't do that. Got to do that functional behavior. If you've already got one, you start with the behavior intervention plan. Is this listed under his behaviors? No. All right. Then we do an updated psychological. We have the school psychologist. Is there something changed in this kid's life or in his personality? We got to do an updated on that. Then we got to do an updated IEP. Need to have the IEP. We got to do all these things. We got to do all this. It takes about 2 weeks. Go through all this stuff, and then and only then we make a decision. The team, the IEP team, makes a decision that this either was or wasn't a function of their disability. Now, here's the problem you get into. Let's say that kid did something pretty bad and he got suspended for 10 days with a recommendation for a long-term suspension or alternative placement. He's out during those days. You're on 2 weeks. He's out for that 2 weeks, 10 days. That's 10 school days. He's out for that. You got to get all this done. Now, here's the problem. At the end of that 2 weeks, if the kid, if he manifests, you got to let him back in. There's no long-term. There's no alternative school. You got to let him back in if he manifests. Now, if he doesn't manifest, then he may end up being suspended for more days or may go to an alternative placement. We don't normally ask that EC kids get suspended more days. Anybody want to know why? Normally we send them to an alternative school. You want to know why we don't want to have them suspended for more than the 10 days? Anybody want to take a guess? Or anybody know? Somebody may know. What would we have to do at home if we put him out for more than that?
They acquire their service hours. They're going to start to build up.
There you go. we'd have to send him some, we have to have some kind of a homeschool deal.
Yep. We also work with home base, which is what we call it for our EC codes. It's homebound for regular ed, home base for EC. But yeah, we had one student who, due to the severity of the actions, he was expelled, but we are
Yeah.
still responsible to provide
Yeah.
him his EC hours. So even though he wasn't registered in any classes, could not attend any schools, he was still in our system because we had to provide him those
That's
EC
that
hours.
child fine provision that we
Correct.
talked about.
So we had to provide them those
Yeah.
hours. As a testing coordinator, I have a sign in my office and I live by it. It says, "But did you document it?" And so if you didn't write it down, if you didn't, doesn't matter what your best intention, if it wasn't written down somewhere and it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. So we try to encourage, especially with our home-based children or homebound children, that all hours are documented so that we can say that, yes, they have been giving their service hours that are in their IEP or their ILAP or their 504. 504 doesn't really have service hours, but their IEPs and their ILAPs would.
All right. So here's the next thing. All right. Now, if we give him more than the 10 days or her more than the 10 days, then our problem is we got to provide homebound services or something like that. And so we send, we send this kid to alternative school. Do we have to have an EC teacher over at the alternative school?
Yes.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Now, people think, well, if they put them out in the regular program, that they're just out. Sorry, that's not the case. Hold on a second. Somebody's at the door. Let me run them off. All right, we're good. See, we got into this in one of the rural counties that I worked in the western part of the state, where when I put this school together, I was in the central office. I put this school together and opened it. The school thought, well, we can just dump all of our EC kids over there. No, if we don't have an EC teacher, you can't do that because we're not providing services. And so some districts intentionally don't have EC at their alternative sites so that they don't have to deal with them. But then what you've got to do is try to do some kind of a homebound service. And so you got to figure out, my point is, you got to figure out how does your district handle alternative and discipline for exceptional children? Are they willing to do the homebound services or in-home services? Do they have an EC teacher over at that can make sure this? Or do they send somebody over to the alternative school from one of the other schools? I've seen push-in models like that. But you've got to figure that out. What are my options in this district? And make sure that's the substance, and make sure, and it's different for every district. Whatever the substance is, that's the process, the procedure that you follow. That's the whole long-winded part of this. Is it can vary. I mean, I've heard of stuff and I thought, I don't think that meets the letter of the law. And they said, well, we're getting by with it. We're doing this. I mean, whatever it is, but don't assume that there's one way that this all happens across the board. It doesn't. It happens different everywhere, just like hiring. Again, hiring, got to do 9 things, but who does those 9 things varies from district to district. The services vary from district to district. We're supposed to give them all the same stuff, but how we deliver it, the process is different in every district I've ever seen. You got to know that. Leanne, glad to have you tonight. How can we help you?
Well, my thing is like when you have the alternative ed, I worked at Turning Point for 7 years in Cleveland County. And what would happen is the regular ed would use the 10 10 days.
Yeah.
And then they send them to alternative ed and think, oh, they're going to be magically fixed. Well,
Yeah.
we're bound by the same laws, even if we
Mhm.
have the EC teacher. And so then those children had to continue coming to class. So we had to do away with out of school suspension, in school suspension.
Yeah.
We literally kept these kids in class no matter what
Yeah,
happened.
because you'd already used up their days. Absolutely. Thank you. Once you've used up their days, that's, that's it. And so what they would do is use up all the days and send them over there. But usually they're on a 10-day suspension from their home school, pending, the manifestation determination. And so the Deck 5, the paperwork, the functional behavior assessment, the behavior intervention plan, updated psychological, updated IEP, those are the same everywhere, but how that process carries out, whether you have alternative, whether you have EC. Sometimes I have heard some districts will go ahead and send them to the alternative school rather than the 10 days because they didn't want to do services during the 10 days and they were doing the services that way. It works different everywhere. I've heard of all kind of models. Now, again, about half of them, I would argue, I wouldn't think would be legal, but they're doing them anyway. So whatever whatever the process is in your district, understand. But again, a couple of you pointed out our stars of the week. Talk to other administrators and counselors, maybe the EC, people who have worked with these kids. Try to find out what's going on. Make sure that before you discipline any kid that they're not attached to some federal program and are a protected class, that you're going to get in trouble for not adhering to whatever their plan is, their IEP, their PEP, their BIP. I mean, all these different plans that are out there. Make sure that a kid is truly regular ed before you start doing discipline with it. So that's my advice on that. All right. Now, let me share my screen again. Thank you, folks, for your input on that. All right. So let me get rid of that one. All right, back to discipline. Here's your code of conduct. Remember, the state manual says what they won't put up with, and they have rules for alternative. They have all that, but then your local sets all the punishment levels, either with a tiered or a level system. Make sure that you're within those. And again, that's why you might want to talk with other administrators that have dealt with kids, what they've done so far. We're looking for something that works. We're not, I hate to say this, many times teachers are looking for revenge or vengeance, retribution. You're supposed to be looking for interventions that work. That's the whole idea. And so, as you can see, here's that safe harbor provision I was talking about that hopefully all school districts have written in to their code of conduct, where you can turn something in that would be bad and without punishment. But again, this gives you a range and gives you the different things that you can do. I like this. See, this is level 1. There's a lot of different interventions there. Don't become a one-trick pony that, this is the only thing you do. Try to find something that works with these kids. Unless it's something pretty violent, I wouldn't just normally just go to level 2. I'd try maybe another level 1 intervention if the last one didn't. And so you've got a number of different interventions. I know that some of them are personnel required, have to have people to do it. Just like this peer mediation, I mean, this restorative justice, restorative practice, peer jury, peer mediation, community service, somebody has to supervise that. That takes personnel, takes time and money. But if you can do it, it's a really good thing. But there's a lot of different things that you can do, but make sure you know your code of conduct and what your range is. And again, I'd speak with other administrators, counselors, EC teachers, especially if you're dealing with an EC kid. But here are all the different consequences in your book. No corporal punishment. You need to know that. Now you say, well, I know I can't be paddling kids. Anything you do, like making kids stand in the corner, run laps, walk steps, that's corporal punishment. Make sure you know that anything physical is corporal punishment, anything. Procedure for short term, right here is your due process steps, right here for a short-term suspension. These are in addition to any others. Again, this is the procedure in this district. This is procedural due process. This is how they do it in this district. Right here. And right here is for your long term. You can plus a recommendation for a hearing for more than that. Right here's how that's got to go. Right here it is. They've got it right here. All the additional steps for suspension on top of regular due process. Right here it is. Should be in your handbook. They've got it in one handy dandy place for you right here. This is really good stuff. Right here. Short term, all the things you got to do. This is other than getting the witnesses and doing all that. This is the additional things if you're going to suspend a kid out of school. You got to know that as well. Here they are, right here. That's why I wanted to show you back here. Procedures for expulsion or exclusion, right here. This is the bad ones. Procedures for re-entry or enrolling students from alternative settings. Point of exit, point of entry. That means kid can't go home and stay and not do his discipline assignment. Right here, cannot circumvent assignment to an alternative school. So if he was supposed to go over there for 30 days and he shows back, don't go, and he shows back up to his normal school in 30 days, he still got to do his 30 days at the alternative school. Procedure for expungement, all the different programs that they have. POPS program, Turning Point, middle school, all the different things that they have, all the definitions, the references here, the crime, here's the crime definitions out of the state manual for you right here. And here's the bullying form. But this is gold right here, folks, at the local level. It tells you if you're going to be an administrator in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, here are the things that you've got to do in addition to all in one handy dandy place for you. In addition to the normal due process, when a kid gets referred to you, you read the referral, you talk to him, you get the witnesses. You know, if it goes past, you know, an in-school type of intervention, if it goes to suspension, you got to start right here. And if I'm doing a 3-day, well, these are the steps, 6 steps I got to do. If I'm doing 10 or more, right here's the things I've got to do. If I'm looking for, you know, a 365, he's brought a gun or whatever, here's what I've got to do. You know, here's a kid that's making petition after 365, they can petition to come back in. Here's what I've got to do. Here's a kid that's coming back from alternative school. Here's what I got to do. Here's a kid that didn't serve his alternative. Here's what I've got to do. Point of entry, point of exit. Here's a kid that's, you know, behaved himself and his parents have come and wants his record expunged. Here's the different programs that we can refer kids to right here. So the point of this is, in addition to your standard due process, there's other due process, procedural due process for your district. Charlotte-Mecklenburg being at that time the largest, now the second largest district in the state, they put it all in one handy dandy place for you as an administrator. Summarize it for you, put it right there. Now, some of you work in districts where you're that lucky, but you should take this as a guide and you should find out those things for yourself. If your district doesn't have them in one handy dandy place, then you need to make you a sheet and put them in one handy dandy place for all the things that you have to do to make sure that you've hit all the notes when you're doing discipline, that you have completely done your due process and your due diligence. All right. Questions about that. So you can see due process that is not just when you're dealing with the kid. There's secondary due process, suspension, according to how long it is, how many days, alternative placements, all those things. That's all part of this one as well. CMS put this handbook together. And it might be, I might be partial to this one because I might have been the one that had it put together about 20 years ago. It could have been me. So But again, I had the same problem. I had administrators that were just all over the place. Didn't know what to do. So, if you have that, you just make one handy dandy one where it's all in one place. All right. Next. I've told you this before, and I know this is sacrilege. This is your Bible, folks. Right here it is. Everything you need to know. This is what your state, and South Carolina has one too, that says they won't tolerate. It has all about your bullying, cyberbullying. It has all your laws. Everything is referenced with a law or a policy. Law is from the General Assembly. That'll be a statute. Policy will be from the State Board of Education. It has all your stuff, your reportable offenses. Talks about persistently dangerous. That's from No Child Left Behind. Talks about Office of Civil Rights. We collect data for them through Power School as well, not just for the state. We also do our federal reporting out of Power School. All the things that we have to do. Right here is the law. It says that you have to do these things. Right here it is. That's right here. Either, again, 115C, that's North Carolina General Assembly. That's a general statute. That's from the legislature. That's from State Board. All the things that tell you what you have to do. Here are the ones. Here are the nine violent acts that count against your persistently dangerous total for the feds. I want to stop right there for a minute. Please don't be an unintelligent person who thinks that these things happen randomly and just incidentally. Again, don't be a person who thinks, well, there's nothing I can do about these things. That's completely wrong. That is completely wrong. These are the culmination of ignoring the little things, the antecedent behaviors. The little things become big things. You don't stop public displays of affection, pretty soon it gets to sexual harassment, sexual assault, sexual offense, rape. You don't stop gang activity, you get robbery with dangerous weapons. You get assault using weapons. Assault, the serious injury. You get homicides. You don't stop the bullying and the cyberbullying, you get homicides and suicides. Last two kids killed in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, results of cyberbullying. Walked up and just shot them. One out of Albemarle, just walked up and shot a kid. They, you let the little things get out of control. You don't deal with them, and they become these big things. And again, you have too many of these 2 years in a row or 1 year and don't pass your state audit the next spring, you're out as a school administrator. You're done. You lose your license. You're over with. And you say to me, well, Dale, how can I stop these things from happening? Well, I'm glad you asked. I put this together 13 years ago. 12, 13, 14 years ago. My last year. This was my grand hoorah. I got to be the keynote at the state conference at Curry and Greensboro. And I hired a criminologist to put all this together. And so this is what I've done. Identification and prevention, identification of antecedent behaviors and development prevention strategies. It's just violent acts on their campus. It's not incidental or accidental that you're having these violent actions. So again, this is from about 2010. That's 14 years ago. That's when I retired. Whew, been a day. What did I think were the things that caused all these violent things to occur? Remember, this is from 14 years ago. How close was I? Nobody even heard of cyberbullying back then, or sexting, using phones for all the sexting, the sex stuff on phones. Nobody even heard of that back then, 14 years ago. But I hired a criminologist. We did research. We tracked all the incidents in Charlotte. We kept a catalog of all the stuff going on. I mean, everything. Because we were having way too many schools on the persistently dangerous watch list, and some persistently dangerous. And we had to bus kids across town, across the county. It was not good. My job was to get these these reportable offenses, these federal offenses, violent offenses down. And this was the culmination of a couple of years' work. Gang activity, that's where you get your weapon stuff, folks. Drugs and weapons come out of gang activity. Now you say, well, Dale, what are you talking about? We don't have the Crips in the blood. If you look at this PowerPoint, you'll find out that there's a lot more than just the formal gangs. There's other types, and we'll look at that in just a second. Bullying, cyberbullying, sexual harassment, which has become out of control, and then all the sex stuff on phones. Girls sending pictures, boys sending pictures, and then using them as leverage and blackmail and all that. And so I've got all the federal stuff here. It's a little dated, but it's still fairly relevant. All the things that count against you. But what I'm most specifically, and it has all the definitions, I won't read it to you. Here's, there's more types of gangs than just your traditional Crips and Bloods type. You have your non-traditional. That's just, sometimes it's just community-based things. They don't even have, it's not, it wouldn't fit what you would normally think. But they exhibit that kind of behavior. You have your hybrid, the tiger, and then you have, of course, your criminal enterprise. That'd be your motorcycle gangs. Now, for whatever reason, people think, well, if we don't have the Crips and the Blood, we don't have a gang. You got to expand your mind and your vision of what a gang is. If it's a bunch of kids acting together to sell drugs or do bad things, then that would be what we would call a non-traditional gang. And if you understand that, you say, well, why you got to put a label on them? If you understand their behavior, you begin to understand their behavior. If you understand who they are, then you begin to understand their behavior. And we identified, and some of these are just fantasy. They're not really a gang, but they're like 3 or 4 kids or 4 or 5 that hang out together and do bad stuff. All the stuff that we got. Let's see. All right. Here's your I didn't. Yeah, I got it. This one right here, the fingernail polish. Who can tell me what gang that is? That's one I always. That one took me a while to figure out as well.
The Crips.
No.
The MS-13.
It's MS-13. It's MS-13 because it's blue and white. 1 and 3. 1 and 3. Got a 13 on each hand. One white nail, 3, 1 and 3, 13. This is MS. Now, not to be confused with Serrano 13, Sir 13. This is MS. All right. You have these kinds in big cities, but you also have this kind of stuff that's just local stuff. And then of course, that's Insane Clown Posse. But you have local stuff that goes along with this as well. And that's what we're talking about here. We have, the one that was worse when I was a junior high principal in Charlotte was the Folks, Folks. And they were just, they didn't have a manifesto. They wouldn't be what you would call a traditional gang, but boy, they created a lot of havoc in the neighborhood. I can tell you that. They were always about weapons and drugs, always. Motorcycle gangs are always about, you say, well, Dale, we don't have motorcycle gangs, but we have their children in school. We have a lot of them. But again, gang activity, flags, all that kind of stuff, the phone stuff, the sex stuff, the cyberbullying stuff. Eventually, folks, if you allow that stuff to go on in your building, you will have violent activities. So it's not random. It's not the luck of the draw. You've got to understand antecedent behaviors. If you understand antecedent behaviors, that the little things become the big things, you can stop some of these violent things from happening in your school. Better job supervising. Teachers doing a better job of classroom management. Processing your discipline, trying to find interventions that work. But making sure that you do it legally, that you're doing your due process, but do all the things you can. But the big thing is you got to be proactive as well. You can't ignore the little stuff. I'm too busy to handle that. Just let them go. No, you can't ignore the little stuff. It becomes the big stuff. It becomes the big stuff. So I've got that slideshow in there for you. All right. Let me move that out of the way. All right, back to our handbook. You have to report all these things. Remember, we're doing Office of Civil Rights as well. So we have to make sure that we follow their rules, everything that has to be reported for them, which is pretty much everything. Publicly available reports, federal office and secondary. We have to fill all these reports out. Again, in Power School, we report incidents, not outcomes. Discipline data is organized around incidents. Don't be one of those people that are dumb and say, well, I didn't suspend that kid, so I don't have to report it. That's an outcome. If it happened, you have to report it. Got to get that in your mind. They've got all kinds of scenarios in here, all the things that you have to do. General guidance, they tell you all these different things that you better read this thing, you better know this thing if you're processing this, about what you have to do and how you have to do it. I won't read it to you. And again, it's got all these different, all these general guidance on all these stuff, how to, entering the participants. And again, if it happened on your campus 24 hours a day, doesn't matter who did it, it's got to go in Power School. It's not just for students. If it happened on your campus, it's got to go to Power. It's got to go in Power School. So here's all the definitions, just like you saw in the handbook, all the things that we have here. And I'm going to get to the part that I'm looking for here, gang activity harassment.
Dr. Lamb, the
Yes.
Bloods and the Crips have formed school age gangs now, and they're
Yes.
called G Shine and Groove. And that way people are thrown off by the names, so
Yeah.
they don't realize that they're actually Bloods and Crips.
Yeah. What I'm talking about, they hybridize. That's called a hybrid. Yes. They have spinoffs that use different names, younger ones. Yes.
What were those?
It's called G Shine and Groove. And they still have first ladies and everything else. I've had a first lady who called out hits in 7th grade. They don't care how young they are.
Oh yeah.
Her brother was in jail. He would call her. He was the big homie, which is the leader of the gang. And he would call her and she would call out the hits on the weekends.
My goodness. But yeah.
And that's in Shelby.
Yeah.
And that's not a big area.
No, but I'm telling you, it's gang activity is much more prevalent than if you expand your definition. It's much more prevalent than we would let on. We want to just say, well, it's just the adult gangs, the Bloods and the Crips, but no, it's much more than that, and that's where you get your drugs and your weapons. Okay, here we go. Regardless of what your system of alternative learning is, the state has guidance on how to enter that data into Power School. And you need to figure out from what's going on in your district about, what kind of alternative. And then the state says, here's how you report it. And they kind of go through the different kinds of systems or programs that you might have. And so then they tell you how to go and report when kids are assigned to the alternative program. Right here is the guidance on that. Glossary of terms and definitions, and then here's your offender types. Again, it's not just students. If anybody does it on your campus, any of these people can be offenders. It doesn't matter if school's in or out of session. If it happens on your campus, then you have to report it. And here's your violent crimes, acts of crime and violence. Again, 9 of these count against your total. Bomb threat doesn't. Kidnapping does. And so here's all your behavior. Here's all the stuff that says the state says can't happen in school if we're paying. And then here's all these other things, all these codes. I saw a homebound code in there. Yeah, homebound instruction. Here's all the different types of things that can be given out. But again, you got to know what your district does. So between this book, which sets all the rules, and then this is kind of like, this is substantive due process. This is what you're supposed to do. And then this, you know, your handbook is how you do it. Again, they give you additional how they want it done in their district right here. Now, again, if you don't have this in your handbook as a merging administrator in your district, you should use this, and you should sit down with your principal and your administrative team and say, all right, I'm going to suspend a kid for 1 to 10 days. What are my steps? Here's this one as a guide. What do we do here? If they don't have one, I've got a kid. He's brought a weapon to school. I'm going to put him out for 10 days. Long term, 10 with a recommendation for 365. You can only give 10 days. You can't give him 365. You can give him 10 with a recommendation for more than that. What do I got to do? Look right here. This is the things that has to happen according to the law. All right. We don't have that written down in this district. What do we do here? And then when a kid gets expelled or gets excluded, what do we do then? And then how do we take kids coming from a locked facility? What do we do? Kids coming from an alternative school. Is there a difference? Absolutely. Absolutely. Most districts, if a kid's coming from a locked facility, they transition them back through an alternative program. What do we do? Kids coming from a locked facility versus coming from another alternative program. What do we do? Right here it is. If you don't have it in your district, use this as a guide. You sit down with people and find out, do we have point of exit, point of entry? You know, kid didn't do his 6 weeks over at Right Choices. Do I let him back in or not? You find out. These parents that come over here pitching a fit, they want the kid's record expunged. What do I do? Here it is, right here. If your district doesn't have it, I would use this one as a guide. Which programs do we have? What resources do we have? Right here we go. All right. Anybody have any questions on how to conduct this? What you need to do? What manuals you need to know that you're using? What system? PowerSchool. Now that's going to change, but it'll be the same thing. It's just going to have a different name. Everybody understands that this is no magic here. Nothing hidden. No sleeves. Discipline is the most transparent thing that you do. And every decision you make can be appealed to the next level up and all the way to court. From the assistant principal to the principal, to the area superintendent, to the superintendent, to the school board, to the court. 6 different levels. Everything has to be, every I has to be dotted, every T has to be crossed. All the way through, every time. Can't just say, well, we'll let that one go this time. But I know his parents, or this is not a big deal. The one that you let go is the one that gets you. Everyone, every day, every time. You got to do procedural due process. And again, if your district hasn't spelled it out as clearly as it is in this handbook, then you need to sit down and use this one as a guide and find out yourself. to make sure that you don't inadvertently not carry out procedural due process that your district expects you to do. Now, when I took this over in CMS, one of the things that bothered me is we expected these people to do it, but we didn't have all this stuff put in one handy dandy place. They didn't know what they were doing. So I started training. I hired a group, and then when the money ran out, I did it myself. School administrators that were new to the district, new APs, new principals. You know, kind of developed that as a sideline besides my regular job, because I was having to deal with the fallout for them not following due process, violating EC kids' rights and laws. You know, kids not going to their alternative place, us not getting counted for kids being over there and not getting our money. We were just having all kinds of problems. So we made, you know, we wrote it all down and said, you know, if you don't follow it now, it's because it's not because you didn't know, it's because you didn't want to. And it cleaned it up. We stopped a lot of that pretty quickly. It went much better. All right. Any questions, any input on this? All right. Let's talk about our next case study, which will be due next week. So let me share my screen. All right. This one seems pretty straightforward to me. Somebody said a few years back I should get rid of this one, and then I thought, you're not paying attention to what's going on in society. So here's your directions. Be sure that you've read Chapter 5, Student Rights Principle Guide. Answer the 4 questions in the narrative. Cite how you address mentalized. Okay. Pretty simple. There it is. All right, Jimmy and Willie started courting. Would you consider Mary Lou's comments a veiled threat? All right, you got to know what a veiled threat is. Make sure you do that. I also want you to, while you're doing that, look up heckler's veto. You know what a heckler is? Heckler's veto. What are Mary Lou's responsibilities under the law? What about Jerry and Cindy Hudson? Remember FERPA. Can you be talking to other people, other parents about other people's children? And should they get to attend the prom? But I want you to make sure you look at heckler's veto. I want you to look at veiled threat. I want you to look now. The most important is it doesn't matter if Jimmy and Willie are gay. This is not really about being gay. This is about being a federally protected class. Do they have rights outside of the normal rights of a kid? Absolutely. See, these kids fall under Title IX. But what about EC kids? Do they have additional rights? Absolutely. What about Title I kids? Absolutely. What about ESL kids or ELL? Absolutely. The whole point of this one is any federally protected class of kids, just like when we were talking about doing discipline EC, whether they've got an IEP, a PEP, all that stuff, that means that they're a federally protected class. It's not just exceptional children, though, folks. Got to understand that it's not just exceptional. Period. Okay, so these kids, Jimmy and Willie, what federal protection they have? Title IX. Also, equal protection under the law, 14th Amendment, Civil Rights Act. They are a protected class. And so when you're looking at this, don't just look at it from these are gay kids. These are federally protected class kids. Now, what do we got to do for them? That's what you've got to see is federally protected class of kids. We have to go extra steps in our due process, and we have to make sure that we're doing the right kinds of things. There's been a wave in this country of let's go back, and most of it is before the Civil Rights Act or Brown. We want to go back to a better time. I was alive during those times. It wasn't better, folks. I'll just tell you. But some people believe it is. They have nostalgia. They think Mayberry is real. There's people that go to Mount Airy every year. It's right above the house, up 77. I live on 77 at Lake Norman. You just keep going straight on up. Right before you get to Virginia, it's Mount Airy. That's what Mayberry was based on. That people drive up there and still think that's real. They think Mayberry, the Andy Griffith Show, was real. I was alive during that time. That's not real, folks. But we have these people who want to go back to a simpler time, and okay. But what I'm saying is, there was a time when people said you don't have to do this one anymore. You could use a different protected class, but I'm afraid that time has passed. I've even had a student in this class say, I wouldn't let that kid come to the prom. Well, you're going to say, well, be such a community backlash. I'd rather get sued. No, you wouldn't. Because just like the lady who refused to sell the marriage license to the gay couple up in Kentucky, all them people that was boosting her up and you go girl and all that, when she went to court, none of them people couldn't be found. She lost everything she had. So the notion here is if you violate some of anybody's civil rights, but if you suspect any federally protected class of kids, if you violate their rights, you will lose. Just that simple. You will lose. So you've got to know that. But that's what this case study is really all about. But again, I need for you to know what heckler's veto is. It's in your textbook. That's when the loudest and stupidest gets their way. That's kind of what's going on in politics now. The meanest, loudest, stupidest, the most threatening, that's heckler's veto, which is illegal, by the way. But you need to know what a veiled threat is. So those are the things that are important. This one shouldn't take too long. But now I'll caution you. The last one, the fourth one, ooh, it's a booger. It's going to be a long one. But this one's not going to be too bad. All right. All right. Okay. All right. Let me go back to full view. All right. Questions anybody has? Right there. I made it in an hour again. I can't believe it either. All right. Look at that antecedent behaviors. It's a little outdated, but it's still relevant. Make sure you start looking at that manual. Find your code of conduct for your district. Compare it to that one. Stuff that you don't see in it, you need to run it down on that extra due process for suspension. Because most officers, I'm gonna write a best-selling book called Discipline for Other People's Children. Nobody ever believes that discipline ought to be for their children. And so pretty much every suspension you do now gets challenged. You better make sure you know what the due process is on out of school suspension. Because you're gonna have to know it. It's gonna happen. As sure as I'm sitting here wearing a red shirt tonight, it's gonna happen. All right. Anybody have anything else? And so next week is our case study. All right, Michelle.
It's a clinical question. I'm coming to a point in my documentation and stuff that, like, for this semester, we have the OMA and the SIP. And so am I supposed to put them both under summer, or should I save one for the fall?
No, you put them both under summer.
Even if that makes us finish all three? Or does it
What,
matter?
what could be better than that?
Okay. Just making sure.
What could
Last
be
semester,
better than that?
we weren't allowed last semester to put more than one per thing. So
Like that. I like working ahead.
that's why some of us have Aptel
Bill and I
ones
talked
in
about that
summer.
already today. Bill and I talked
Yeah.
already. Life happens, folks. If you get a chance to get ahead, get ahead. There is no catching up as a school administrator. If you get behind, you'll be behind the rest until you retire. I'll just tell you that right now. You need to get in the habit of the school administrator. School administrators don't say this isn't due for 2 weeks. I'll wait till next. No, if I got time now, it's due in 2 weeks. I'll do it now because I don't know what's going to happen between now and then. But I swear to you, as those of you who are already in the role, you never get caught up. You get behind as a school administrator, you will never get caught up. You say, well, I'll get caught up this summer. No, you won't. Some things you can't catch up. Some things are just, opportunities has passed. And so, Michelle, that's a good point. If you can finish that thing this summer, I'd knock it out. Whatever you can do, get it done. If Bill and I were talking earlier, if you can get to the cap, I mean, don't slow down. Just get caught up. Get past caught up. Get ahead. You never know what life happens. We got some people on this screen tonight. Life's happened to them recently. It does every now and then. I've told you before, my wife and I, 1 month short of 10 years, were involved with elder care with elderly parents. You never know when something like that's going to strike. Children, y'all still got school age kids, many of you. You just don't know what's going to happen in your life. But if you're planning, prepared, and you're ahead, you can deal with it. It's not just the actual work of getting behind that's so bad. It's the emotional damage that it does to you getting behind. I did a dissertation with one of my doctoral, she's principal right over here in McDowell County at Nebo Elementary School, Jennifer Croymans. We finished last December. And she did one on principal self-care. And that's one of the things that they just, it's such an emotional strain, getting behind, being behind. And that's why they stay on their phones all the time. They can't disconnect because they know if they get behind, they can't get caught up. And the emotional beating, you've always been on top of it all of your life. You've always been, an overachiever, a striver, and all that. And then, you get behind that's about the worst thing that can happen to you as school administrators, to get behind in terms of your emotional well-being. It's worse for you than actually working around the clock. The emotional beating that you put on yourself for getting behind, the embarrassment, the shame. Yeah, you can't get out of that, folks. I'll just tell you. We did one on the 7 pillars of wellness. It was a really good one. I enjoyed it. It was mostly qualitative, which I prefer the other end. I like to thump the numbers, but it was still a good one. And that's one of the things that we found out is the stress kills you, and it's not the workload, it's the behind load. It's the behind load. Sparkle, I saw that in your face. It's the emotional part of dealing with that. It's not the work, it's the emotional part that beats you down. Yep. And many of you, some of you on the screen, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That being behind piece. But if it didn't bother you, you shouldn't be in the business of school administration. If you're so laissez-faire that being behind doesn't bother you, you can't run things. You can't be in charge of anything. I wouldn't let you be in charge of a popsicle stand. I wouldn't let you sell lemonade. If it didn't bother you, then you're not in the right business. So the trick is just don't get behind. All right. Anybody else got anything for the good of the group? We have one that wanted to stay on. All right. I'll see y'all next week. I'll stay on and answer any questions that you have. Good to see everybody. I'll pause the recording now.